morning, everyone. We might get started today. The first thing I want to do is acknowledge that today we're meeting on Turrbal and Yagara land. So I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of these countries and all the countries throughout Australia and Torres Strait Islands, and pay our respects to elders past and present. I also want to extend that respect and acknowledgement to any First Nations people either in the room with us or online. My second job is to announce our speaker today, Dr. Jaramar Villarreal Rosas. And Jaramar is a research fellow at Griffith University at the Sustainable Rivers Institute. And she has a PhD in conservation science from the University of Queensland and a master's degree in environmental management from El Colegio de la Frontera Norte in Mexico. She uses an interdisciplinary approach to integrate principles and tools from precision science to assess costs and benefits of different management and conservation interventions at the landscape scale. So without further ado, I'll let you take it from me. Thanks, Jaramar.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thanks everyone for being here and the opportunity to present today. It is very exciting because, as mentioned, I get a PhD here, and I used to come to these seminars. So it's very exciting to now come back and present after some years. Okay, so I'm going to start. So probably most of you are familiar with this slide. So this is like famous words from Hugh about how to solve problems, conservation problems or any problems really. And it's like this 5-step process that is really the core of structured decision making, starting with deciding what you want to achieve. So your objectives, listing the things you want to do to achieve those objectives or your actions, then predict how things that you can do affect what you want, choose from the things you have, like what you actually can do. So that's understanding your limitations, implement, and then learn from that and adapt, change your intervention. So that's the recipe. Well, this is not something only that Hugh says. No, there's a lot of literature in this area that probably a lot of you are familiar with. Here I just put some examples of my favorite papers on the area. But there's a lot of applications of structural decision making and spatial planning, including some of my papers as well, and the work that I did during my PhD. So for example, this is a study that I did in the Brigalow Belt Fire region in Queensland, Australia, where I identified like optimal places to restore forests to decrease flood risk to different beneficiaries. So planning units, and you select which ones are best. And another example of that, I worked in Nepal, and similar, trying to identify where are the best places to implement different nature-based solutions to achieve mitigation and adaptation to climate change objectives. So, well, I am really proud of my work, and it's great, it's published, everything. The truth is that in both of these examples, I didn't have the Nepalese government coming to me saying, I actually have $40 million to start implementing these nature-based solutions. Can you let us know where it's best? No. Similar, I didn't have the Queensland government coming to me saying, where do we restore forests in the Brigalow? So obviously there's the theoretical importance of these studies, but there was no actual intention to implement anything. So here a little joke. So we're always wondering about the impact of our research. So at the time, I was just like this guy, and I see the papers, but like nothing. Luckily, that changed when I moved to, and I joined this project. So that's my current position. So the title of the overall project is Global Prioritization of Mangrove Conservation and Restoration Incorporating Future Climate Change Impacts. So this project is a collaboration between the World Wildlife Fund, the US office, and Griffith. And yeah, it was great. The The countries that I've been focusing on are these three: Mexico, Belize, and Madagascar. So it's this global, well, obviously that's not like, those are like case studies from the global analysis we're doing. And I'm gonna focus on that on this talk, sharing more of my experiences of moving from conceptual frameworks to actually implement things when you have governments and NGOs wanting to know the results of these to start implementing their projects. And yeah, this is just an example of all the different organizations that I have to engage with. So even though there's like WWF and Griffith on the ground, there's a lot of more organizations that are involved. So specifically, I'm going to focus on these three aspects, challenges and rewards of solving real world problems. So I'm going to start with delivery deadlines. Then I'm going to move on to stakeholder engagement processes. And finally, I'm going to talk a bit about governance. Okay, so on the first point, delivery deadlines. So I'm going to use Mexico to talk first about when you have really limited deadlines. So the first location where I had the opportunity to work is in Mexico. It's like it was the dream, right? To be able to go back to my own country, that's where I'm from, and implement some of the knowledge that I've been learning throughout my PhD. So I worked in the Biosphere Reserve Marismas Nacionales, Nayarit. It's one of the biggest mangrove areas in Mexico. The total area is 133,000 hectares. Not all of that is mangroves. But we have 45,000 hectares of degraded mangroves. Mostly it has to do with production activities and changes in the hydrology that is affecting the mangroves. So I got involved in the project, and the local agency that manages the protected area, that was not local, it's federal government, and WWF and the Nature Conservancy had this 6-month deadline to know from those 45,000 hectares of degraded mangroves where they start implementing restoration actions. That's my task. And yeah, it was a bit confronting to like finish that in 6 months, divided into coordinating with the different stakeholders, identifying what the decision problem was, collecting the data, analyzing the data, and going into rounds of revisions with the team. This one is published, so you can read more through that case study detail. Here, I just put a bit of a summary of the results, and if you want to ask me questions later on, feel free. So what we did, we were trying to identify locations where if we implemented actions, we had a higher feasibility of success. And that higher feasibility of success was determined by ecological and socioeconomic factors or metrics, including things like migration space and inundation and amount of like healthy mangroves that could provide propagules to the restoration areas. And on the socioeconomic, we had the capacity of that area to undertake activities like fishing and grazing and agriculture. So we had our 3 scenarios just to make it more scientific, but really people, the decision makers were just interested in combine everything and tell me where. In red, you can see the priority restoration sites, but you can also see how that changes depending on the type of metrics you consider. In terms of impact, so amongst the more rewarding thing was that we managed to convince the decision makers, the government and the NGOs, to relocate the funding. So this is where now they are implementing actions, so like it's happening now. that circle over there in the east of the area is where they used to invest most of their money. They spent millions that came from other grants in trying to restore that part of the protected area. But turns out that area has been degraded. Like the mangroves are completely dead for more than 40 years. You have extreme salinity, you have like a lot of hydrological issues that are not just to do with what's happening inside, but at the landscape scale. Could be solved probably, but you need a different type of investment and not, yeah, for what the resources they had, it's just not, doesn't match. So we were able to convince them to relocate their funding to another area where you have like bigger chances of success with different scale of actions. Okay, so moving on to the second point of deadline. So still a little bit on the deadline aspect, but also on the stakeholder engagement processes. So now this is the second location where I had the opportunity to work with. So I am leading the development of the National Mangrove Restoration Plan for Belize. And this is not just having a plan at the national level, like it's the actual policy that is going to lead mangrove restoration in Belize for the next 5 to 10 years. So the Forest Department wants this is done together with WWF. So here it is the opposite in terms of deadlines. We had envisioned that we were going to finish this in 1 year. It's been more than a year now. And the main challenge here, but that is also like great, is that you have a lot of different local NGOs and local government agencies, and there's a lot of data coming from one and then another one, and they all want the data coming in. And so the deadline just keeps changing as we try to incorporate all the voices. So yeah, so the complexity, like engaging with different organizations. But just to give a bit of a teaser as well on the actual work, if you want to ask questions later. So for the ones that don't know where Belize is, it's the south of Mexico. So it's our neighboring country, but on the Caribbean side. So amongst the work that we've done, we ran participatory mapping with the communities all across Belize, more than 200 participants, 7 workshops, 17 communities. We also did national level field work to grant truth the information that we had from the communities plus all the spatial analysis that we had there. And the main degradation factor in Belize, well, more than degradation here is just clearing. So the main pressure is clearing for development. Yeah, so chopping down the forest, the mangroves completely, and building houses or resorts. And the last one, we also have these analysis of the vulnerability of mangroves to climate change. This is a tool that with Kat was mostly involved. I was involved a little bit as well. So creating a tool that was mangrove specific to assess climate vulnerability. And that is available online if you want to check it out. Or you can ask questions as well. I am not going to go through the specifics of it, but just for Belize, this is the results of our vulnerability assessment. So at the top, so we have like 2 contrasting scenarios. The tool considers vulnerability as the result of the exposure to different climate factors like cyclones and extreme rainfall, extreme drought, but also the geomorphic characteristics of where the mangroves are. So if they're protected in a lagoon, if they're exposed and they're on an island, how much sediment comes in. So this is part of Christina's, I never know how to pronounce her last name. But was a combination between the tool and some of Christina's work. Okay, so those are like the factors that we don't have a lot of control in, but we do have a bit of control in terms of land use and erosion. And so those two scenarios reflect that. And this is part of the results that we are presenting and I wanted to incorporate into the planning. Try to convince the government of the importance of allowing enough space for mangroves to migrate with sea level rise. So basically, if you have sea level rise and you have a lot of development happening inland, then there's no space for mangroves anymore in the collapse. So trying to allocate some space there. And you can see like in the results, so the landward mangroves are the ones more towards the land and seaward, the ones like adjacent to the water. So you can just see like the difference in the probability of loss between like if you have the worst case scenario of like high land use and high erosion of 65% to 33% if you like have a bit more space for mangroves to migrate inland. So yeah, we're trying to convince the government like with this of importance or like getting more strict with the regulations for development. So that is work in progress, but I'm going to talk a little bit about Madagascar as well, and how different stakeholder engagement processes are depending on where you are. So Madagascar is a completely different context. The communities that live where the mangroves are completely depend on mangroves for their energy needs. So there's no other sources of energy for cooking or let alone electricity or anything. So so in this case, so there's like these governance units called community-based natural resource management units. And so the communities, they don't own that, so it's not their land, like it's still government land, but they have the rights to manage the resources in there. So the goal in this Madagascar project was to develop management plans within those community-based natural resource management units. So that the communities could make decisions about how to manage mangroves and to restore some areas. So here, first of all, like big shout to all. So we've been collaborating with local students from two universities in Madagascar. So they are really the ones that go and undertake focus groups. So they've done more than 30 focus groups across the different communities where we're working. And they are also collecting biophysical data to understand the condition of the sites. Yeah, so what we have, like this is finished. I am in the process of writing it down. But yeah, so we have the management plans ready. Oh yeah, and in terms of decision making, that was my first point. Here we didn't do like a formal optimization because the objective was that the team with their capacities were able to keep informing management. So we came up instead with a decision tree that is very simple. Where they can, if they go through the decision tree, understand or not understand, but identify, okay, this area goes for protection, this area, so it turns out it's actually infeasible, not unfeasible. Socially infeasible, or low potential for restoration, high potential for restoration, and a bunch of different actions that are associated with this. And it integrates both the biophysical conditions of the sites, but also the uses of the community. So they're using it for charcoal or shrimp and drying or all the other activities they use. Yeah, so that is an impact. So having these management plans that the community are already using and implementing, this is going to be extended to another 13 CDNRMs, the community-based natural resource management units. And another key thing for Madagascar is that, well, the people that are involved in like mangrove work, we talk a lot about like the importance of hydrological restoration as opposed to just planting. In Madagascar, they were not very familiar with that and they didn't know how to go about it. So, so now we talked about those other actions that they can implement and how to monitor it. So that is Madagascar. And now I'm going to move on to the governance. So here we have a photo of mangroves. Can someone tell me their best guess of what's happening on this side of the photo, what's happening on this side in terms of management and degradation? This is a highway or like a path. Just in.
I'm going to say this in a very non-scientific way, Jaramar, but it's removed title introduction to the part on the right. That's like the only science thing I know, so thank you for that question.
Yes, so this happens, this is one common driver of degradation of mangroves. So when you lose the tidal influence because of the path, then on this side, well, now this is restoration, but you can imagine all these big patch of mangroves died like some years after they created the highway. So in terms of restoration, this is why like hydrological restoration is like super key, because you can plant 1 million trees here every year and they're never gonna be successful because they don't have that tidal influence that mangroves like. So why I'm saying this? I'm gonna go back a little bit to the Mexican example. So these photos are examples of what happens in Mexico in terms of mangrove restoration. So yeah, great. There's more understanding of these hydrological influences. And there's a lot of engagement with the communities, and the communities actually get paid to help dig channels to reintroduce tidal flows. But I mean, everyone that has been in a mangrove knows, imagine like digging these channels manually in the sun, like it's hard work. Other solutions. So you can have machinery, perhaps, to help you do that. There's also culverts. So culverts, like in the highways, these holes for the water to go from one side to the other. So what is the problem? The problem is, for example, if you wanted to get machinery inside a protected area, most likely is that you're going to need an environmental impact assessment because usually you are not allowed to have machinery in that area. If you wanted to put culverts in the highways, in Mexico, in that area where I worked, there's actually 3 highways crossing the area. It goes beyond the power, the authority that the agency that manages protected areas can have, right? Like you need to engage with the government agency that is in charge of maintenance of roads. So they not necessarily, their objectives, or what we call it mandates, don't necessarily align between the other organizations that you may need to engage with your conservation and restoration goals. So So the point here is that sometimes some restoration actions require engagement with different institutions or require different permitting processes that kind of escape what the planners envisioned. And that can cause delays or more expenses than budgeted. So I'm trying to capture that with complex regulatory and institutional structures. And that's just a photo to try to capture that complex systems. So in Mexico, as far as I know, this has not been matched, but in Australia it has. And a lot of the work that Justine has done, and Nicole, Shamway, and Rose Foster, they've been working hard trying to provide evidence of how the complexity of permitting processes can become a challenge, a barrier for restoration. And I don't know if like you had the opportunity to attend we had a full day workshop last Monday where we discussed this with different government agencies from New South Wales and Queensland. So it was interesting when we started working on this, Justine and I, because I was like identifying these issues in Mexico, and turns out like for oyster reef restoration, for tidal restoration, generally speaking, in Australia, there's the same challenges. So this is just an example of like the different permits that you need to go through and who to talk with for oyster reef restoration. So it is not unique to one country. Like this is a challenge that can potentially restrict achieving like global restoration goals. Because as I mentioned in the Mexican example, it is not just about if you can actually implement your actions or not. Like it also decreases the impact or the ambition of the actions. But you could maybe restore 600 hectares if you don't have the permits or the institutional engagement. Maybe that turns out to be just 10 hectares. Or maybe some government, some practitioners just don't follow through the project, and so it has impact on implementing restoration actions. So in this paper that I was really hoping that it was going to get accepted by now, and I can present it here, but it went through review. We didn't have like the best kind of feedback. So we're still working on it, and hopefully that's gonna get sorted soon. But anyway, these are the ideas. So in this paper, we are trying to conceptualize what are those complexities when trying to implement restoration. So there we have on one side statutory law, so that is legal formalized regulations across 3 different axes. So we have national institutions, state institutions, and local institutions. So we are calling the vertical complexity, or like the different permits and negotiations that need to happen at the different hierarchy as vertical complexity. So like if a local institution needs to discuss things with a national institution or with a state one. And horizontal complexity, then it's at the same hierarchy level, the negotiations and permits that need to happen. And between all the regulations. And on the other side, on the left, we have legal pluralism. So, or what I define there as like people's law. So when you, like every, the rules that apply on the ground, that sometimes clash with what legally is written. And we see a lot of these, particularly with land tenure, for example. There's a difference between what governments have this is the boundary of an area, and like on the ground, it applies completely different depending on the communities. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but this is an example that we had for Brazil in mangrove restoration, and identifying what are those complexities across the different actions that happen in a mangrove restoration project, going from the removal of previous infrastructure and like in blue, the communications amongst the national level agencies and how they needed to communicate to the state and local governments. Then different process if you want to remove invasive trees present in the area, different process again for the planting and fencing component, and different process again for the monitoring of the site. So just an example there of like how this can be like, mapped out. So our main goal and message that we want to convey with this paper, and then going back to how I started, our recipe to solve problems. So we had these kind of different boxes of information we need, like the objectives, the actions, the predictions, limitations. And then you have your limitations and then work backwards to identify what are the best actions to achieve your objectives. Usually in most applications of conservation planning and decision making, those limitations are good costs, usually like material costs or maybe acquisition costs of land. What we are trying to argue here is that in those limitations, if we understand much better these regulatory and institutional structures of the different actions you want to implement, that are not only specific to the environmental space, but all the other institutions that you may need to engage with to be able to actually implement your project, if we could map out better, then we will have like a more realistic estimates of your costs, of your timelines. You can identify what permits you need, if you need extra lawyer advice or some specific consultants or researchers that help you solve like that particular aspect. And if we understand that better, then we can make better predictions of how we are going to implement our actions and what actions need to be better to implement how. And then we can solve problems. And that is all I have. Really short, so we have.
Thank you, everyone. Does anyone have any questions?
You said something about data validation in Belize.
Yes.
How did you do it? And to what extension did you validate all data, just a sample of data? I wanted to know a little bit more about this process because this always intrigues me. Because you probably received a lot of data, so you can't validate all of it.
No. True.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to summarize here. So we had different layers of information coming from the communities, but also coming from previous like remote sensing data that we had on where in Belize there's mangrove, degraded mangroves in need of restoration. We decided as a working group that we were going to try to ground truth specifically what the communities told us. So we like say, I'm going to kind of invent a bit of numbers, but we had maybe 2,000 hectares of degraded mangroves across Belize. We were not going to go to those 2,000 hectares. So we decided to make an overlap between like from NDVI, that's how we got the designation. What areas of NDVI overlapped with areas that the community also said were degraded, and those patches that we had like that kind of triangulation, those were the ones that we gave priority to, and that came down to 600 hectares, I think. So those were our priority areas to go to the field.
You got to make some measurements.
Yes, so we did salinity, vegetation structure. Yeah.
Hi, great talk, thank you very much, super interesting. When you were talking about the example before this in Mexico.
Yeah.
And the change in where they were, yeah, exactly. It just confirming, it kind of sounded like the main driver there was the cost implications of trying to restore that area. Was it the cost? It wasn't other objectives, targets that weren't being achieved by it, it was mostly like what it would actually cost to do the restoration there, or what was the driver in the change in areas?
No, it was the metrics that we included in like the objective function.
Okay.
So in here, the ecological, we said, no, this is like not very accurate. So, but yeah, so in this one, we said, okay, like, you know, find the areas where you have more migration space, less inundation, like permanent inundation, more healthy mangrove patches that could provide cropping woods to the areas that has been integrated more recently and with like the actual level of degradation is low. So this is what this first scenario try to do. So find the best spots on just considering the ecological factors. This one was like, okay, like find the areas where you have less grazing, less agriculture, more tourism, more fishing, thinking that these are compatible with restoration. And those were the areas. And that one there is like, find the areas that have the combination of these.
So in some sense, the cost of restoring those areas is sort of inherent in the degree of degradation and the time that it's been degraded.
Right,
Things
yeah.
like that. Okay.
Yeah, true, yeah. We actually didn't have like proper, like a monetary value that tells us the cost, but is kind of indirectly try to capture those metrics. Yeah.
Thinking about the costs and the last work that you showed, that is under review.
Yeah.
You said that the limitations most of the times comes down to costs, or at least mostly to costs, right?
Yeah.
And how, the next thing that these two things, are you explaining how they would diminish costs possibly? Or is it more like management reasoning? Or do you also go, because I understand that you are talking about like management, how you can like optimize the process, but
Yeah.
thinking that costs are so important, do you also get to to show, maybe, or at least show a possibility that in which cost would be lower following your
Yeah. So we do have a section there on how, as practitioners or researchers, how we can build like social capital. So that relates to basically having good relationships to try to accelerate this, like accelerate processes and permitting processes and institutional willingness to participate in restoration. I don't think we're gonna get to the point of like actually quantifying that, or if someone knows that you can quantify social capital and like predict it, that would be awesome, but I don't know. But we do have some recommendations there about more proactively building that social capital. But I think that, yeah, we have that, but in parallel to that, trying to understand like that network of regulations and institutions that potentially are involved in the project. That is a more practical suggestion I think we are putting into this paper. Like, you know, that can be possible in all contexts, and like I see it very clearly in Australia, you have a lot more of that information available in terms of institutions and permits, etc. If you want to do something like that in Madagascar, like you ask even the government, so what permit do you need if you want to like add this in the national park? And Who knows? We don't even know there's a permit needed or not, like there's like less knowledge, like at hand, or less experience trying to implement these actions that, yeah, so kind of go case by case, but
Yeah,
yeah.
so getting the community involved would be one of the ways to like optimize costs maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, good, yeah, nice.
Yeah.
I don't know, okay, go ahead. I have one more. We have time.
Thank you for the talk, it was really great, and I'm wondering if your dream was created and you could map all these regulatory structures and institutions and laws, like you have just like really fine grained access to this across the globe. And now you imagine that someone's gonna do systematic conservation planning with this information. Do you think that the outcome will be more likely that this is gonna be used to sort of redirect funds from spots where it's gonna be really difficult, be like, oh my God. There's all these institutions, all these, oh yeah, no, that's gonna be so costly, now I can actually maybe not go down that rabbit hole and I can redirect those funds to, oh, there's this spot where, oh, it's gonna be quite easy. Or do you think it's more like people will be now just more prepared and be able to really, launch into that difficult spot? Do you think, or maybe it's a mix of both?
No, I've been trying to like make the point of we need to understand it to be able to improve our planning, and kind of be mentally ready for the challenge, and strategize ways of simplifying that. So there's like different levels of intervention. Like one is the one that I said, like we're calling it actor based. Like what you could do as an individual to try to accelerate that. Of course, there's like bigger level, like institutional structures that maybe you don't have that much influence. But yeah, anyways, the point is like I think the way I see it, it needs to be more on the let's tackle this problem as opposed to let's avoid it and then go for the simpler solution. Yeah.
I happen to be married to somebody who is working on a big global environment facility project, which includes Madagascar coral reefs. And the lead people on it are WWF. And I'm sort of curious if there's any interaction between the restoration of the mangroves and coral reef people, because it seems like there should be, but I haven't heard her say anything about it.
Well, no, that is interesting. Probably should be more.
Yeah.
I also am not super involved, like not involved at all in the corals.
Yeah.
I don't know at a higher level, surely, like WWF, but yeah.
Surely, but
Or maybe not.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would be interesting to
Yeah,
see,
yeah.
and maybe we could.
help them, I don't know.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for the really great talk. I'm interested, I really learn a lot of things and interested on the different layers of government and the complexity across from the local to the the higher level hierarchy. And when you're working across different countries and different states, do you experience slightly different layers? Is there some that is slightly more flattened? You can go straight to the say higher level governments and they can straight implement the project, and then some take a longer period that you go through layers by layers, and how does it differ across different jurisdictions of different countries?
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is just my perceptions. It's not like I haven't done a proper study to try to map out all the regulations and institutions in each country. But my perception is that it comes down to how innovative the actions that you're proposing are. So as I said, like in Australia, this tidal restoration is something quite common now. And so the government agencies are more familiar with that and what that implies in terms of permits, etc. In other places like Belize and Madagascar, where this is new, sort of like no one is that sure what needs to happen. In Mexico, it's also more familiar, like people are more familiar with it. So there's a bit more, it's just like that capacity gets built with experience. So yeah, generally, I think that's what I see. Like when you try to implement something new, no one knows really what to do with it. Yeah.
I've got a question if you want.
Yeah.
I was just interested if you wanna, could you talk a little bit more, because like obviously a lot of us who do global work just kind of do it from our laptops. But you're actually doing like global work and visiting these different locations. What were kind of your big takeaways in terms of the difference between obviously working in Mexico where you're really familiar with the country versus maybe some of the other countries? What was kind of felt like for you in terms of, what your approach was and how to do it?
Yeah, more on the like my personal experiences. The fun bit. No, culturally it has been very interesting. Yeah, because working in Madagascar, as I said, like it's a very different, like culturally it's very different. And also the language. So yeah, I don't really speak French. And that's what they speak in Madagascar. And so anyway, I think on top of like the complexities of engaging with different stakeholders, etc., there's like that cultural aspect of how you actually interact with different people. I am a bit embarrassed of saying this, but Belize, even though it's like our neighbor, I didn't know culturally how different it was from the rest of Latin America. It's not even Latin America, because it was, they had a British colony, like that's their background. So yeah, like learning more about the culture and how they do things. Yeah, I sort of need to adapt to like different ways of working of each team. Yeah, to try to make it work. Yeah, I don't know if that. Yeah.
Is there anything on line or any other?
Yeah.
Level?
How was the process in Belize? That I've understood that in Belize you had kind of a demand from the government. Am I wrong?
The demand, did you
A
say?
demand coming from the government to have the project done.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how was it? Did they like come to you to ask it?
So it happened because as part of this big project that I'm involved in, I was already working in Mexico and Madagascar doing like mangrove planning.
Yeah.
And then Belize, but mangrove restoration these days, like most countries that have mangroves want to get restoration happening because of blue carbon. So there's a lot of money that's going now into mangrove restoration. So Belize was one of those countries. They committed to like whatever hectares of mangrove restoration for the NDCs. So they had like this kind of political pressure. And yeah, because of the work that I've been doing, there was that question. Like, oh well, why don't you do it here? Sure.
Do you think it's gonna be more likely that they listen to you because of this beginning, maybe?
Well, I assume so. Like that's kind of, they invited me because in Madagascar, I'm also part of the like committee that is developing the national mangrove restoration plan for Madagascar. So yeah, like there's different countries that now are wanting to have their own like mangrove
Yeah, so
plan.
the governments are looking for it, are looking for
Yeah.
it, and help them to
Yeah,
define where to. Okay, good.
Yeah, no, it is exciting.
Yeah.
It's very exciting.
So maybe some challenges in the way, but
Yes.
it's a good start, I guess.
No, yeah, like it is, I feel very happy that, that's gonna become like the actual, like, policy that's gonna,
Yeah.
lead mangrove restoration. Yeah, it's good.
Awesome.
Thank you.
We might, unless anyone else has any burning questions, anything online, any compliments?
That was super interesting, really enjoyable.
Thanks. Okay.
Thanks everyone.
We might thank you for our guest.